So hi, Lynne. I'm very happy that finally we have a chance to speak online. And I do appreciate you accepted our invitation to the conference, EAGT conference 2019 September. Do you remember this book?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Oh, and I found very interesting questions, and I really would like to ask them. But first, I would go forward some questions which are really connecting to the conference.
Okay.
And one of them is, what really inspired you to accept our invitation to be a keynote speaker?
Because I was honored to be asked. And I had such a wonderful experience with the EAGT crowd at Taormina that I thought I'd like to attend. This is a great way for me to be able to attend your conference in its ordinary settings, not in that mixed setting. So there's those reasons, and I've never been to Hungary.
Oh.
So that'll be fun.
Hopefully you will like our town, because you won't have too much time for the whole country, but the capital is really beautiful.
Right. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. So, Lynne, connecting to your biography, which I'm very much interested in, and I've read some, what would you say that it was really something which you would like to share with us as participants on the conference, to know about you, and maybe something which connects to the fertile void, if there is any?
Because people know that I'm also a psychoanalyst. I want to make it clear that I'm a Gestalt therapist in my bones. And that when I'm in the analytic world, I may use analytic language, but I'm speaking from my Gestalt perspective. But in terms of the fertile void, I have to say I prefer the term creative indifference, because I'm not sure that, and this is part of what I'll talk about in my keynote, I'm not sure that if we are conscious, we are ever in a void. So for me, it has more to do with how we relate to whatever we're conscious of. And that's where I actually prefer the idea of creative indifference. But I don't want to give away my whole talk.
Yeah, sure, yes. I was very interested in, when I read about you, that you mentioned you are very quick in your work. So
very quick.
Very quick. So in consultation, in supervising.
Yes.
You are a quick person.
This to me is where creative indifference comes in, is because when I'm working at my best, I can quickly form ideas or notice my reactions and responses, but I'm not invested in them. They become part of a dialogue, but I can easily be told, no, that's not my experience, or whatever. So it doesn't, the only time that being quick becomes a problem for me is if in my quickness I'm overriding some kind of, if I'm going too fast to allow more complexity to emerge. And then usually in supervision, because in therapy I'm slower, but in supervision, that may be a problem for a few minutes until either my supervisee or I are able to catch, well, wait a minute, somehow this is pulling us too far in one direction or another. Let's slow down and breathe for a minute. Because I'm not going to change the fact that I'm fast.
Yeah, but you are very aware of it. Yeah, so connecting to supervision, if you would like, you think you can speak about a little bit. What was catched my interest is that you once mentioned that you do therapeutically supervision, orientated supervision,
Right.
and, and didactic.
Right.
And
Right.
finally, you said that you don't find aesthetic.
Right.
It was like so interesting to me that how is it? So would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with the aesthetic because in my fast self, it's easy to move into the didactic oriented supervision, right? And I take pleasure in thinking about the work that my supervisee is doing and the dynamics of the patient that they're treating, let's say, and there's something to be learned from that. But I think the more profound learning is in the therapeutically oriented supervision, where we focus more on the patient than the therapist's bodily reactions to moments with the patient and to how the enduring relational themes that the supervisee has are playing out with the patient, supporting them in their work with the patient or inhibiting them in their work with the patient, and how they're playing out, how mine are playing out with the supervisee and the supervisee with me. That's more usable learning most of the time. So what I struggle with is how to balance the two, because I think a supervisee also wants to leave with some cognitive frame, which I'm good at providing. And yet, what's more usable is the more therapeutically oriented work we do. And I find, the image of how when you're riding, let's say, in a sailboat, you do something that in English is called tacking, where you never are going in a straight line towards the opposite shore. You're tacking a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right and a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. That's how my supervision goes. Like I don't feel like I'm ever just spot on, that I have exactly the right balance. So I'm always self-correcting.
Yeah, but for me, it's like an aesthetic way. So that's the aesthetic of the system.
Well, that's okay. That's the aesthetic. Yeah, I'm more self-critical about it than you are. Yeah, but it feels clumsy and clunky to me. But yeah, I like what you're saying. That in itself is an aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can find, because here you said, I want to find an aesthetic. you said here in Jay's book.
Yes, and thank you. I think you've just helped me find it.
Yeah, sounds good. There is one more topic which I am really interested in, and that's it. Female or male therapists, how they work. Is there any difference? How it has any effect to the client or to the therapeutic work?
Uh-huh.
And I like the sentence you said, which is, the actual gender may not be as important as how they experience the therapist.
All right.
So I do really like this sentence. And if you're willing to, would you say a couple of more words about this, how you approach the topic?
Yeah. What you mean? How I'm saying more about the gender issue?
Yeah.
Okay.
The gender issue itself, because this sentence says a lot, but I would happily hear more about the topic if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me, though, is how the gender of my own therapists has affected me, which contradicts what I said in the book, but I'll circle back to it. But I, for instance, chose a male therapist as my first Gestalt therapist, in part because I was worried that a female therapist would have her own ideas about what a woman is supposed to be like, and that she would try to change me to be the kind of woman she thinks I ought to be. Mm-hmm. And that was a dread that I had. And I felt safer seeing a male therapist, because somehow I thought they wouldn't try to change how I am as a woman. And then so my therapist was Gary Antal for many, many years. And then at another point, I decided to get some psychoanalysis from a female therapist, because I'd read something she had written, and she focused on emotional process like a Gestalt therapist would. So I thought that would be good. And I really, really, really benefited from it. And she didn't try to impose her notions of what a woman is on me, right? So I've, in a way, I've really, I think, benefited by working with therapists of different gender. But I've seen in my own practice and heard from many other therapists that that overall, what has mattered is the therapist's capacity to, at one moment, be very gendered in a way that matches how their body is. Because in that moment in time, the patient wants to relate to that kind of person. But at another moment, be able to identify, like I'm marked as female, so identify more as male and allow the patient to relate to me more as male. And at another moment, relate to me as a kind of non-binary person altogether, that the therapist needs flexibility to access ways of owning all the ways we tend to gender people, and allow that to be part of how we meet our patients at different times. And I found that with the three major therapists in my life have all been able to do that. And some of what was very powerful about Gary, for instance, was his ability to not be stereotypically masculine when I wasn't looking for that. You know, his fluidity that way. That allowed me to be braver about choosing a female therapist, assuming, hey, maybe she can do the same, which she did. So
Lynne, I have easier questions, like what do you read currently, and is there any plan for the next year in your professional and private life, and a little bit personal facts about you?
Okay, let's see. Was that first? What am I doing now currently? Is that, yeah? Well, I'm sort of busy because I am very active in my own Gestalt Institute. We have our own training programs, of course, and every year I'm the host of our international training that happens every March or April. So that keeps me busy, but I'm also teaching in my psychoanalytic institute, and I'm teaching about power and privilege and how that shapes psychoanalytic practice. we look at how many, we look at how psychoanalysts largely come from a white, relatively privileged background, and how that affects how psychoanalysis has developed as a theory. And we're trying to unpack that and broaden our theory, of course. So that's something that's very, very close to my heart. I'm very interested in how, in American culture, white supremacy, basically, which comes from our colonial past, and how that shapes life in America for everybody. But the people who seem to know the least about it are white people. So I write articles to try to help white people understand white privilege. And I do that both in psychoanalytic journals and in Gestalt journals. And meanwhile, I just spent, in terms of my personal life, I just spent a week with all of my siblings. I have 4 siblings and their spouses and their children. And with my husband, we just spent a week vacationing together, living under one roof together, 17 of us.
Oh my God.
And we enjoy each other so much we don't fight. There's no fights. Wow. So that happens every other year. We do that. And I just returned from that trip. Yeah. So that was very, very pleasing to me.
High awareness in the air. If there is no conflict.
Well, yeah. What it is we were all raised to be accommodating to each other. So we're each accommodating each other all at the same time. So, but we just love spending time together. We live in all different parts of the United States, so it's hard to get together, but we make sure we do it. And then in this coming year, that's another hard question, believe it or not, because the only thing I know about what my future holds is that it's like what my present holds, because I love what I'm doing. So I hope I can keep doing it. So I have some speaking engagements, some travel for speaking. Like after I go to Hungary, then I'll fly from Hungary to Montreal, where I will be a teacher at a psychoanalytic weekend workshop. So I enjoy switching hats like that. And so I have some travel arrangements made for this next year. I'll be in Italy and in Poland this coming year. And as my husband and I are aging, we're trying to do more things together ourselves as well. But that means I have to slow down a bit, and I'm not quite ready for that. So
you look like really extremely young. So I don't know exactly your age, but you look really like.
I'm almost 70. I'm 68. I'm almost 70. Yeah. 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 And my husband is 76. Mm-hmm. So we think more we have a limited window in front of us, and how do we want to use that window?